Welcome, everyone. So glad you're here. My name is Scott James. I get the pleasure of introducing you to these three authors that you see here, Bob, Jeremy, and Gabe. We're going to have a bit of a freewheeling conversation. I've got some ideas about questions that I want to hear from them, and then we'll get others involved as well. So, with that, gentlemen, welcome to Bainbridge Island. We're so glad that you're here. Thank you for writing this book, which I found fascinating. This is the third edition. So this edition, they have added generative AI to an already existing set of data points and deep thinking. And on this one, Bob brought two new folks along. So can I have you each do a quick introduction of yourself before we get into the conversation? Start with Bob.
Sure, I'm Bob, and I got this ball rolling, this Leaders Make the Future ball rolling, the week before 9/11. It's almost 25 years ago now. I was invited to the Army War College for the first time, and I am not a military guy by background, so I really didn't know what to expect. And I was introduced, again, this week before 9/11, I was introduced to the concept of what they called the VUCA world: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I got intrigued with the idea of what would it mean? What would it mean to be a leader in the VUCA world? So that was the way I was framing my writing, and at Institute for the Future, we were framing a lot of our forecasts around the VUCA world. But then, things got even more chaotic. And in this last year, we've started using the term Bonnie future for brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. The Bonnie future. Our colleague Jaime Cascio coined it some years back, but it has a certain ring to it now where people would say, yes, I'm experiencing that. And so I'm also just finishing up another book about the Bonnie future with Jaime and with Angela Williams, the CEO of United Way Worldwide. And Angela is kind of on the ground with the Bonnie world, the way it's played out. So in this image, you see the difference between the second edition of Leaders Make the Future, which came out in 2012. You know, from 9/11, it took me 9 years to write the first edition. Finally did it. The 10 leadership skills kind of resonated. But this image on the cover is a real internet traffic diagram from a graduate student at Carnegie Mellon. And the question we were asking is, how do you want to be connected? Because leaders wanted to be connected to the internet through apps or through whatever. 2025 now, the new edition, what you're going to get a copy of this today, the new edition is asking a new question: how do you want to be augmented in a Bonnie world that's even more chaotic? And the image, the background there is an image that Jeremy created with our publisher using generative AI. And we'll use that nickname Gen AI, but it's basically thinking about how to augment ourselves as humans. It's not artificial intelligence. That's just, I think, an awful term. It's the worst term to describe an emerging technology I've ever studied in my career. But it's more about augmentation. So that's the shift we're going to talk about, is this shift from the VUCA world to the Bonnie world, and what does it mean to be a leader in each of those?
Jeremy, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and your original connection to Bob in this project.
Sure. I started working with Bob about 10 years ago, and Bob has mentored me in the practice of foresight. And then over the last decade, I've moved more and more into building systems around generative AI. And Bob, you were bringing up 9/11, and you were asking me earlier, where was I on 9/11? And I was, I think, quite a little bit younger than you were at the time. So I wasn't quite writing books yet. I was in 6th grade, and I remember that we were allowed to have, we weren't learning anything that day. We just had the TV on all day. And so I was excited because we could watch TV all day. But it's interesting, that medium of television, and that's the medium of the time, that we were getting information from a single screen and a select few stories on the wall. I don't know what the equivalent would be today. Maybe they'd let us have TikTok open all day or something like that. But or what's the new one? Xiao Hong, the Little Red Book, Xiao Hong Shu, whichever.
It's really funny that you're actually looking at this side of the room and asking, what's the new thing that the kids are talking about?
And I got into generative AI because I love poetry. And in 2019, I was working on a project with IFTF and encountered GPT-2 and was really excited that it could create poems in the style of Pablo Neruda and come up with ideas. And since that was my job at the time to come up with ideas, I figured I should probably figure out what it was doing. And yeah, so more to say, but that's how we got started.
Thank you. Gabe, tell us a little bit about your first connections with Bob. If it's like a meet cute story, I totally want to hear that. And your introduction to conversation about becoming a co-author.
Absolutely, thank you. So I'm the Director of Scalable Foresight at the Institute for the Future. I've been at IFTF for almost 8 years now. Came in to support Bob on his various books and his various projects. And Bob always told me from working with him, I just had to have one good idea a day and then I could be done working. And I remember one of my very few great insights with Bob was looking at his trilogy of books and saying, Bob, I think you wrote a trilogy here. We were talking about the 10 skills, the 5 literacies, and the 1 mindset. And it kind of had a ring to it. And so that was my connection to this work on the 10 leadership skills and kind of supporting Bob. But I thought for the longest time I wanted to be a corporate lawyer. I was supposed to go to graduate school. I had been accepted to a JD MBA program in the Bay Area. And I just needed part-time work for about 3 or 4 months. And through a friend of a friend of a friend, I heard of this weird place called the Institute for the Future, and they needed someone to just come in for 3 or 4 months, and our colleague who's sitting in the room here, Lynn Jeffrey, she came in through like a robot. It was like kind of a robot thing that came in. She said, welcome to the future. And I remember she was my first interview at IFTF, and after interviewing with her, she said, this is the wrong role for you. And I'm thinking, my goodness, I have tanked this interview. And she clearly knows. She's like, no, that's not what I mean. She said, I want you to come back tomorrow, and I want you to meet Bob Johansen. And so we scheduled lunch the next day. And unbeknownst to me and unbeknownst to Bob, we just had a conversation with each other. And Lynn came, she was in person the next day, and she came physically to where we were having lunch. And she said, listen, I think you two should partner together. I think you two should work together. And it was in that moment where it clicked for both of us. And so from there, Bob and I kind of started this partnership and kind of working together. And I've worked with Jeremy along the way. And, looking at this book and the 3 of us, I'm kind of the one that doesn't quite make sense. But I think we'll get to that point in a little bit. But that's kind of been my introduction to Bob, to Jeremy, to this book and the work at the Institute.
That's great, Gabe. Thank you very much. So you just mentioned the 10 skills. I'm wondering, Bob, before we jump into too many more stories, if you could give us the room an overview of these 10 skills.
Sure. Future leadership skills. So this is trying to figure out what will it take not only to manage, but to lead and to thrive in this increasingly Bonnie world. And how might augmentation of some form change? And it's important to realize that the concept of augmentation is not new. The term artificial intelligence was actually coined in 1956. 1956. So it's taken since 1956 to be an overnight success. Very long time. In 1968, Doug Engelbart, the guy who invented the first mouse, the first Windows, the first screen sharing, so much of what we're still trying to create. He was an old friend of the Institute at SRI, where Marina Gorbis, who you're going to hear about in a moment, came to us from. And Doug created the mouse. He created this vision, which we're still chasing. And just to give you a sense of this, what augmentation for leadership means, just to give you a sense, Here's a clip from this video from 1968. If you want to watch the whole thing, you can just Google the mother of all demos, and this video comes up. So this is Doug with the first mouse. It actually looks more like a rat. It's a great big mouse. And the first screen sharing system, the first windowing system, its first hypermedia system. And he was exploring what would it take to augment the human to deal with complex problems, and how might that actually happen. And of course, the technology wasn't ready for it. And he says right here, I don't know why we call it a mouse. We started that way and we never did change it. That looks like a mouse to me. It's just running right around the screen. So this has been a very long time in coming. So we ask ourselves now, finally, augmented reality, generative AI is ready. It's actually ready, not to replace humans, not to replace, but to augment, to enhance, to expand, to help us stretch our thinking. So I've got a customized version of Gen AI that I've nicknamed Stretch, and I am a former basketball player, and I get the metaphor. Stretching is what this stuff does really well. So we've reworked these 10 future leadership skills. You actually have one of those skills on your badge that you were introduced with, and all 10 of them are up there with generative AI images that Jeremy has created. And before we break into the more social time, Jeremy's going to explain how you should look for the same symbol on a different badge as you meet people. But this is the overview, beginning from augmented future-back curiosity, because if you're going to think about the future, you got to start from being curious, all the way out to human calming, which in the end, we have to come back inside ourselves and say, what is our center? What are our values? What's our purpose? What's the meaning we're seeking from this? And then ask the question, how? How do we want to be augmented?
So, Jeremy, Bob just mentioned Stretch. You created Stretch. Can you tell us about that? What were you thinking? How were you thinking of customizing it to Bob in his specific, peculiar way of going through the process of creating like 15 plus books?
Yeah. We work with individual leaders to help them augment themselves, taking them from the 10 future leadership skills to what do you do on your computer all day. And so we wanted to try that first with Bob. And it's different for every leader. Some leaders focus on communicating through video. Some communicate through text message. Some, like Bob, write books. And so that was what we focused on. And we talked about what Bob does in the book writing process and realized that coming up with new ideas was what he wanted help with. And so we designed it around that. And there's also some particular things Bob likes in his writing, like lots of M dashes and certain kinds of new neologisms and adjectives that you'll find in the book here and there, quite a bit. And that's part of supporting Bob in his writing. And so Bob has written about a book a year for a while, and then this year he's on track to write 3 books at, I think, the same or better level of quality than before. And so it wasn't about how could we replace Bob, which we haven't quite been able to do yet, but how could we augment what he was doing?
I love it. That's a great, unique insight. Gabe, you also brought a unique aspect to this 3-person partnership on this book, being one of my favorite type of people in the world, a skeptic. So tell us a little bit about your role as the early skeptic on the team.
Yeah, Scott, my family's in the back there and they're laughing because I've always been the skeptic and everything. I've always been the one who says, hang on, wait, I know we made a decision, but let's slow down and think about this. And when Bob and Jeremy approached me and they said, we've got this idea for the 3rd edition of the book and talking about generative AI, I agreed to join them as the co-author, but I said only on one condition. you have to let me ask difficult questions. You have to let me slow us down and say, that's great, that's a wonderful vision of the future that we're talking about, but let's think about some unintended consequences. Let's consider alternative points of view. Let's think about the impact on non-leaders. Let's think about the impact on people that we're not writing for, and kind of how do we make sense of that? And so that was the voice that I brought to the book. You know, I mentioned to my co-authors at one point, I kind of felt like, man, I think I'm a fraud here. My name is going on a book on about generative AI and the future of generative AI, and I was the last one of the three of us to even touch a generative AI platform, to touch a chatbot, to actually interact with it. And to this day, I don't use Gen AI as much as Jeremy and Bob do, right? Jeremy can go under the hood of Gen AI. I don't know if that's a useful metaphor, if it's an appropriate one, but that's what Jeremy does. And Bob talks to Stretch probably more than he talks to me, right? And so here I am, kind of the last one, but you know, it really went to show that first, Bob and Jeremy were graceful enough to allow someone to slow the process down and to ask these hard questions, but it revealed that we got to some interesting conversations, we got to some interesting discussions, and what ended up coming out was a true future-back view of a transformative, aspirational, possible future if you consider kind of all of the different aspects, all of the different angles and opinions.
Thank you, because that's a good metaphor. I want to touch on a few other metaphors, or prompt you all, because there's several that run through this book. So Bob, first for you, the metaphor of a combustion engine. So generative AI as a combustion engine. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure, and I'd like Jeremy to build on the metaphor, because I learned it from him. But what we're at with generative AI now, it's not so much a thing that you can evaluate separately. It's more like a social medium that you have to learn how to use well. So to me, generative AI comes to life in conversation. It's not really particularly good as a question-answer machine. It's certainly not trustworthy as a question-and-answer machine, but it's really good at coming to life in conversation. So I'm having continuous conversations with Stretch all the time. But if you look back in time, it's a little like we've just discovered the combustion engine, but we haven't figured out what to do with it yet, what to build with it, you know, cars, trucks, tanks, whatever. And we certainly haven't figured out how to use it yet as humans. And I think that's so important. It's not just the technology, it's the skills, it's the practice, it's the discipline of using it. And that's where the combustion engine, I think, is helpful at identifying, well, where are we in the process? We're not at the end. We're really at the beginning, even though this all started in 1956.
Yeah, if someone asked me how did I get to Bainbridge Island where we are today, I wouldn't say, oh, I came by combustion engine. I would say I came by a ferry. And of course it runs on a combustion engine. And this is what happens with technology. We only call it by the technology when it doesn't really work yet. When I'm ordering a car with a ride-sharing app like Lyft or Uber, and someone says, what are you doing? I don't say, oh, I'm using a cloud computing app to transform geospatial data. I say, oh, I'm calling a car. And so in 10 years, no one's going to be using generative AI. We're going to be using things to help us write, things to help us play, things to help us think, but we won't call it that anymore because at that point it'll be working well enough. Mm-hmm. But we don't really know what those things are yet or how they should look.
Jeremy, while you've got the mic, there's another metaphor that you've mentioned of flight. Can you unpack that for us a bit?
Yeah, it was quite a while after we invented the engine that we invented human-powered flight. You actually didn't have to use a combustion engine for it, though. I live in a building right now in Emeryville that's 100 years old, and they made, among other things, steam-powered airplanes, which I'm very grateful I did not ever have to fly in. Steam-powered cars that took over an hour to start. And so you could make a car out of other things or a plane out of other things. With generative AI, it's kind of like we have the engine but not the plane. Something that's interesting about planes, though, is that it was about 20 years after we had invented human-powered flight that we invented the concept of lift, which was the original physics concept to explain why they go up in the air. We had the plane before we understood why it was flying. And we're kind of in that moment right now with generative AI. We can see what it's doing, we can see that it's up in the air, but we're still trying to figure out why. And so you can still, even though that's the case, you can still scale it up, you can still make it safe. And as you get a deeper understanding, you could do more and more things with it.
Gabe, there's a concept that you all talk about in the book called scalable foresight. Can you expound upon that a little bit?
Yeah, Scott. So at the Institute, I went to our leadership and I said, I've got an idea for a new title. And they said, well, what is it? I said, I want to be the director of scalable foresight. And they said, well, what does that mean? And I thought, well, I thought it sounded good, and I thought that was good enough. But in doing the work and working with organizations and kind of helping them right size, bringing strategic foresight to their leadership and to the broader organization, it really is this process of this mindset of futures thinking should be a part of everyone's job. Thinking about the future should be something that all of us do. Now, realistically, not all of us can spend all of our time thinking in the future. At some point, some of us have to come to the present and we have to do things that the present demands of us. But scalable foresight is figuring out how we take everyone's ideas, everyone's opinions, different experiences, and filter that into creating a vision of a possible future that we should be working towards, or a disastrous future that we want to run away from. And so scalable foresight is getting everyone's voice in the room in order to influence where we want our future to lead. And so that's kind of what we talk about in the book here with scalable foresight. Any good futurist, any real good futurist will tell you that the best futures work is done collectively. It's not done in a silo. It's not done with just one brilliant brain. It's done with different perspectives. It's done with different opinions. It's done by bringing a collection of people that don't look the same, that don't think the same, that don't expect the future to unfold in the same way, because that brings about really interesting questions of the future that make us pause and think, what should we really be working towards?
So speaking of three different perspectives, or having those in part of this book, for one of these perspectives, you've got this fellow, old hat. He's written, 12, 15 books. Like I have, there's a Bob Johansen shelf in my library. It's right next to the David Corton shelf in my library. For you guys, though, this is your first book for each of you, yes? So tell us a little bit about that. Unpack that experience for us. Jeremy first, and then Gabe.
Sure. I think most of the time when you have someone who's written a lot of books and someone who hasn't written a book, they would be in the armchair kind of expounding, and I would be frantically scribbling, trying to get down the wisdom. But it actually was a little bit of the opposite, where Bob, really helped structure and drive it, and then I came in to help with the technical depth and add in ideas, and it became over time quite a conversation, as you were calling it, Bob, a back and forth between us as things evolved, as the ideas evolved, and as we started to shape the book together. And in a three-way authorship as well, you're kind of three people working on a sculpture together, and so you push too far one way, you push too far the other way, and slowly what emerges is something that would be better than just one person working alone.
Yeah, I have to echo that sentiment. And first and foremost, it was such a humbling experience. I never in my wildest dreams would have thought that I would have my name published on a book, right? And so very grateful for the opportunity. But as Jeremy said, it's about right-sizing the ideas. It's not about knowing the answer and trying to get it on writing. It's about going through the journey, going through the process, and saying, these are some really interesting questions, and this is our view of what we think is right for the future, and this is how we want to help you get to that point. And so, the book is not just our opinions, it's not just the research that we've done into this area, it's also about how do we help leaders today and next generation leaders kind of think through these difficult decisions, think through these difficult opportunities, We talk about, there are mediocre leaders today, and generative AI is going to make mediocre leaders even more mediocre, right? There are really great leaders today, and generative AI is going to make those great leaders even greater. And so what we've tried to do, especially towards the end in creating this discussion guide, is helping people grapple with some of the questions, some of the considerations, some of the notions that we've spent a lot of time challenging each other and agreeing and disagreeing with each other on. And so, it's very, such a humbling experience to be able to be a part of that process and put that on paper.
If I could add something to that about what we mean by leader. Part of the point of the book, an implicit kind of current through it, is that there will be many more leaders, that more people can be leaders. And maybe in the past we would have said that, and maybe we would have meant it, but it's hard, right? How do you actually get someone the knowledge and resources and capability in the moment to stand up, even if you give them the permission? And so Bob talks about shape-shifting organizations, which weaved a lot into the concept of augmented smart mob swarming. And part of this is going beyond permission for more people to have leadership in the moment by, at the right time, giving them the right context and the right things that they need so that they, on the ground where they are, can be leaders, just as right now we can only apply resources to certain people in organizations. If you go to the top level of organizations, people get leadership development training, and they get sent on retreats, and they get sent to schools to develop these capabilities, and it's not easy. And so part of our hope is that with technologies like generative AI, you could expand this kind of immersive learning to more people, this kind of give people the communication capability that they need in order to do that.
Thank you. Okay, so Bob, similar question for you about the writing process. Tell me about the intergenerational aspects of this, because that table is slightly younger than this table. So I'd love to hear from you what that was like in collaboration.
Yeah, I've become such a believer in cross-generational collaboration, and I've learned so much from these two, and cross-generational is just so powerful. Now, as I've gotten older, and this is a milestone birthday for me, as I've gotten older, I have felt different. There's some things I can't do that I used to be able to do, but there's other things that I can do that I couldn't do before. I know how to play the wisdom game now. I know how to play it much better than I used to. And what I'm trying to do is to learn, especially from people who are much younger than I am. So I view this as reverse mentoring, and I think it's one of the most powerful media for learning that we've had. So, Jeremy he's created Stretch for me, and then Stretch is kind of a bridge in a way for me to different perspectives around the world. But I think one of the simplest, most powerful things that we can do as we get older is to work with people who are much younger. And it isn't just mentoring, it's reverse mentoring.
Thank you. Okay, question for all three of you. We'll start at the end with Gabe. Favorite passage from the book and/or favorite one of these that you end up talking with family and friends personally about? Not work, not talking to Fortune 500 clients, your friends and family. So either one. Gabe,
Yeah, so can I answer both? Because they're related.
Yes.
Mine is the feature-backed skill of augmented clarity. This whole notion of you have to approach the world, approach your surrounding, approach your future with clarity rather than certainty. You want to understand where you want to end up. What is the ultimate goal? But be very flexible in how you get there. I wish I would have learned this a lot sooner, because I thought I wanted to be a corporate lawyer because I wanted to ultimately become a general counsel of a big, well-established Fortune 100 company and be advising executives on how to take their company in the future. I got to that point without the headache and the heartache of going through law school and business school. And that's not to, diss anyone or dissuade anyone from pursuing that, or if you did that already in your life. It's just something that I didn't end up doing. And so this whole notion of clarity over certainty is one that I talk to my family, my friends at the Institute. We've been fortunate enough to have a couple of interns come through and teaching them the skills. And it's something that I try to instill in them, is this whole notion of clarity. And so on the flight here, I was reading back through the book cover to cover, and I was like, man, these authors are just brilliant. This is a great writing here. And I actually flagged my favorite passage. It's from the chapter of augmented clarity. And this is where Bob is talking about chatting with Stretch, his custom GPT-4, about the difference between clarity and certainty. And so this is what Stretch has to say. He says, clarity is the crystal clear lake, surface smooth, bottom visible. You know what you see, no murkiness. Certainty is the anchor, plunged deep, unyielding, immovable. You're staking a claim, whether or not the waters are clear. Clarity illuminates while certainty fixates. And this is my favorite part here. Stretch says, clarity is an open book. Certainty is a closed fist. One lets you see, the other makes you stand your ground.
Mm. Wow. Well said, Stretch.
Can I just add to that, that was such a powerful quote that I said, okay, Stretch, who said that? And he came back, or it came back, saying, oh, this was just spontaneous. I just created it. So I asked several other versions of Chat GPT, other kinds of systems at the time, and I got 5 different sources for that quote. So it's a cool quote, but don't trust it.
Jeremy, how about you?
That's what they say about B. Cool quotes, but don't trust them. I find myself talking about 2 skills with people in my life. One, most recently, is this idea of augmented depolarizing. The world feels really polarized right now. And if we do this wrong, generative AI will be a way for us to have the most powerful confirmation bias filter bubble machines we've ever encountered. But if we do it right, it'll be an amazing translation layer for us to hear each other better. Hear what people are saying if they're of a different personality type, if they're of a different political ideology, or, of course, if they're from a different culture or language or any of those things. But even more subtle things, we could hear each other more clearly with it. And then the other one is future-backed curiosity. I find myself often in the role of kind of helping people see the fun in it. And there's a lot of dark parts to this technology, as with many, of course, but it's also a way to really bring things to life that you wouldn't have otherwise. You'll see there's a QR code for a soundtrack I made for the book, and this did not replace the musicians I would have hired to make a soundtrack for the book. And it's a lot of fun. Content is liquid. I can express myself differently with this. And it kind of starts with curiosity. And so I try and bring people into that when I can.
Thank you. Okay, Bob, favorite passage and/or leadership skill that you talk with personal people, not your clients?
Yeah, so just quickly, human calming is where I'm focused right now. It began with some challenges I was sleeping, and this kind of half awake, half asleep state. But in the Bonnie future, it's very disturbing, for me personally, and I assume it is for a lot of you all. And there are methods now, practices that we can use to create a kind of a human calm, a kind of discipline of thought that allows us to be more grounded, more prepared, more able to confront. And here I'd like to turn it back to you, Scott, and Bainbridge Prepares, because I've learned so much from you about how preparedness is one of those practices and skills, and it links to augmented commons creating, finding values that we share. It links to augmented smart mob swarming, which is what your teams do. You've got 800 volunteers on the island using drones, using flotilla, boats, using all medical expertise. Some of you are practitioners of that. We've got Jared, the fire chief here in the room, that participates in this very actively. But I've been inspired by that. And to me, preparedness, particularly getting to know your neighbors and being prepared, that's something we can all do in the face of the Bonnie world. And augmentation can add to that. It can augment us, but it's also a deeply human activity that needs to come from the inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I was to answer one of those questions related to the nonprofit, I would probably pick the augmented immersive learning. So there's a concept called tabletop exercises that many different industries use. Preparedness folks use it on a regular basis. You sit down at a conference room table for 90 minutes. You have a MC that walks you through, introduces new data every, say, 15 minutes. But you can fast forward in time by days, hours, weeks, months, all within that 90-minute session. What you're looking for is how to break the system. So we try to fail fast and fail small in those tabletop exercises so that we can then learn in real life, oh, here's what we don't want to do. And if I think about 10 years in the future, if I think about a generative AI and how it interacts with us at a tabletop, it's interacting at several levels. One, it's interacting with the host, the person who is actually running the tabletop itself, giving real-time feedback, real-time data. Every one of my team leads and volunteers at the table, they're all pulling out their own device. And as Jeremy said, they're not pulling out and saying, hey, generative AI, I have a question for you. It's just it's their phone, or it's their laptop, or it's their book. It's just whatever it happens to be embedded in that device. Yeah. But then there's another layer where over in the corner of a tabletop exercise, I've got my senior leaders. I've got Fire Chief Jared is sitting there, Emergency Manager Ann Lesage is sitting there, my Executive Director Lauren Bast is sitting there. They are not in the exercise itself, they are watching. They are third party watching, and so their generative AI is giving them different feedback and different insights because it's listening to the entire conversation.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Final comments. You each get one. We'll start down at this end with Gabe again.
You know, just this whole notion of in the future, you know, we won't be calling it generative AI. I'm very fortunate to have my family here with me, supporting me, and I've got two very small babies in the family, newborns. The parents, they're first-time parents, so bear with them, bless them. They're worried that the babies are going to be making noise and disrupting the recording, so they're like off in the corner. But you know, as I think about them, they're both 8 months old, a niece and a nephew. As I'm thinking about the future, their future, and kind of what I want for them and what I want out of them, I'm so thankful to be able to go through this process and think through kind of what is the future that is going to help them be better. What is the future that is going to help them teach me as an uncle, you know, teach their parents, teach their grandmother, you know, kind of through using this skill as a second nature, right? Kind of growing up with this and not having to learn and kind of go through this clunkiness that we go through. And so I'm just really excited and really hopeful for the future. It's one of the things that I've learned from Bob, has been, you know, supported by Jeremy, this whole notion of the future is really a scary place, especially if you spend a lot of time thinking about it and thinking about what could go wrong and what, you know, fail-safes could come crashing down, where the breaking points could be. But you know, the best way to approach the dark future is to have hope. And so for me, it's just been incredible to witness them kind of growing up in the last 8 months and thinking about their future and being hopeful for the next generation.
Thank you, Gabe. Jeremy, what do you think? Final thoughts?
I'd just like to say thanks to Bob and Gabe for joining me on this journey, and thanks to everyone for being here. There's so many people here that have just seen me through so many strange iterations of myself, and really grateful that you would all take the time to be with us today. Yeah, looking forward to a future with you in it.
Bob, before we move to the next phase, final thoughts?
Yes. Could the people in the Institute for the Future community just stand up for a moment, just so I can see you, including Anthony and Robert? You're definitely part of this. Yeah, please. And Anthony, Art on our board. Thank you. I've learned so much by being at the Institute for the Future. It's just been such a wonderful growth experience for me, and I've gone through so many changes there and have learned so much. So one of my big behavioral changes in the last 2 years has been I keep a daily gratitude journal, and I write down in my journal 2 or 3 times I'm grateful for something every day. And it's interesting, if you do that every day, by the time you get to 2 or 3, it's very granular. But you're on the list. You're on.
Okay, Raymond, you just sat down, but I'm asking you to stand back up. I'd like to hand the microphone over to you for this next phase.
All right. Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm so grateful for I've been working with you the whole time and to continue working with you, and this is a great accomplishment. I'm Marina Burgess, I'm Executive Director of the Institute, and my story is very similar to Dave's story. About 27 years ago, somebody introduced me to Bob, and Bob wasn't sure what he said. You're interesting, you sound interesting. Give it a chance. And I have to say that has become the main way that we hire people at the Institute. I'm not quite sure, but you're interesting enough, and I just Plus, it helps save people from becoming corporate. Very strong. But Bob, through all these 27 years, you've been such a great mentor to me, and continue to be a mentor to many, all of us at the Institute, and all of you who stood up. We'll get stories of Bob, our own personal stories of Bobisms, and things we all use, VUCA world, and now we're transitioning to Bonnie world, and clarity, but not all of certainty, all these other things. Yes, it becomes part of our parlance, part of our vocabulary. And this morning, actually, four of us are staying at the Airbnb together. We've been working together, Lynn and Kathy and Jean. And we spent the morning just sitting in our PJs and talking about Bob. Years burning. Sharing our stories and our experiences. And towards the end, I think it was Kathy who said, I'm going to quote, or misquote Kathy, that one thing that all of us just agree with Bob is that he has such a deep sense of respect for other people. And that is so, so unique. That when you talk to Bob, he really listens and he wants to learn about you. It's a unique gift. It's a unique gift in these times when we're not listening to each other, we're not hearing each other, and it's just a really unique gift that he's brought to all of us. One of the things, I've learned so much from you, Bob, over the years. He is a master facilitator. He's a master at doing workshops. I think we all know that we've learned to think about not giving away the mic was one of those things. When you do a workshop with Bob, when we used to do it in person, he would always get there early. He already will get there early. So, I don't know, an hour early or sometimes more. But the remarkable and magical thing is by the time the workshop starts, Bob has met almost everybody in the room and found something really interesting about each one of those people. And somehow he manages to bring it into the conversation. So he never forgets to just include people. We used to say, he's better to see the Phil Donahue. I'm probably dating myself. But Bob is just a master, and it comes from such a genuine place. He's truly interested in people, and he truly is interested in what's interesting about them. And that's why it's not surprising he always finds people who are different from him to work with. So it's different in age, it's different in backgrounds, it's different in views. And that is just such an incredible gift that all of us just are beneficiaries of. So I thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's your birthday, and I mean, you have another book coming out also, which is just remarkable. And you know, I hope that we'll continue learning with you and we'll continue working with us. Thank you and happy birthday. Who just joined us. We didn't know she was coming, but Bob's sister Jeannie is here.
I love you. Love you
And
too.
if you can also ask the boys to come up, we've got our grandsons who and our daughter. Oh, they're Jeannie knows how to sing, and I do not. Lead us in happy birthday.
Just make sure it's not like a funeral dirge. Most of them are like that. Here we are celebrating Bob. Everybody stand up and give it gusto. 1, 2.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bob. Happy birthday to you.
Wow. So we're going to close now, but we've got books here for all of you, and they're all going to be signed by all three of us. I've pre-signed my copy, but I'm happy to personalize for any of you who would like them personalized. But the gift that I was really looking forward to, and still am, is the gift of seeing Gabe and Jeremy sign their first books. So what I'd like is for maybe Gabe and Jeremy just stand up, and they'll sit over here. And if you can just kind of stand in line, because I want them the experience of signing with people standing in line to wait to get their books signed. And I'd like to begin the process by having the moms of Jeremy, Lisa, could you come up? And Maria, come on up, and come on up, and you get the first copies from Jeremy and from Gabe, so please. Just go on over and get the books, yes.
Thanks, Bob. Let's get a picture.
Enseña el libro. Thank you.
So that was a gift, thank you. I also, my mom isn't here with us anymore, so I don't have a mom to give it to. But I have a copy for Robin and for Lisa, our daughter, and our son Corey, who's seeing it on video. So Corey, hello, and we love you too. This is for you, Lisa, and Robin. Could you come up again? Thank you, and Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much. And each of you has a name tag with a skill, one of the future leadership skills. And those are the AI-generated art images of each one. And part of how you're going to get to know each other, because there's such fascinating people here. I really am interested in all of you for different reasons, and I hope you can seek each other out. But Jeremy, could you explain just how you did this and the process you designed?
Yeah, sure. The process of making them involved a few different systems, used some language models to help come up with the concept, and then some image generators to make it. And then we put together these name tags into a little game. After you're done getting your book, if you want one, your task is to find someone else with the same skill